Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a spider can. We're talking The Amazing Spider-Man number 314. Hit it. It was 1989. The Velvet Revolution began in Czechoslovakia. The Mirage Hotel and Casino opened in Vegas. Driving Miss Daisy hit theaters, and Peter Parker had to fight crime and find his Christmas spirit after being evicted. I'm your host, Jerry D, with another episode of Totally Rad Christmas, the podcast that talks all things Christmas in the 80s. Toys, movies, specials, music, and fads. If it was gnarly during Christmas in the 80s, we got it covered. Now, joining me is a Totally Rad Christmas all-star. From the Blackadder and Only Fools and Horses episodes, it's the host of the bodacious Merry Britsmas podcast, Adam Parker Sibun. Adam, how's it going?
Hey, Jerry. I'm great. Thank you. Yeah. How are you?
I'm doing all right. It's my day off, so it's always great.
Good. That sounds good. First day back after half term for me here. We're just back after a little break from school and now back into very busy, but exciting, festive winter Christmas stuff all kicking off at school now, which is all very exciting here.
So you guys had a little break? That's interesting.
Yeah, we have what's called a half term, which is like a week off in the middle of a term. So you go from September till October, a little week off. So like 6-7 weeks, and then 6-7 weeks till the Christmas break.
Oh, that sounds awesome.
Yeah, it is. It's good as for students, of course, to get a rest, and for teachers to get away from them.
Yes. Having been a band director myself, I understand that very well. No, that's really cool. I guess that's kind of like spring break that we have, but in the fall we don't really seem to have anything analogous over here.
Yeah, it's quite nice. It's just a little sort of break. It works out generally around Halloween time as well, and just gives that little bit of a rest before the Christmas rush and all the exciting and very busy stuff that comes up in a school, like carol services and Christmas fairs and all things like that, which are all very fun, but a lot of work as well.
Definitely a lot of work. Yes, I've put together quite a few services and things like that myself. There's a lot of rehearsals, a lot of planning, and then just if you're printing out things as well.
Yeah, the energy and time. Yeah, it's exhausting. But for someone like me, a Christmas obsessive, I'm more than happy to do it.
That's right. Yeah. So today we're talking Spider-Man. What's your history or just your general knowledge and experience with Spider-Man?
Yeah, well, so it's a bit of an odd one, I suppose, because I've done British stuff, but being the host of the British Christmas podcast, I've come on and discussed British things. But as soon as you mentioned Spider-Man, my ears perked up. I share a last name with the titular Peter Parker.
Right.
So growing up, it was Parker, and I had that shared name. And it started from very early childhood, just being a bit obsessed with Spider. Like I was quite obsessed with superheroes generally, as many young kids are.
Right.
And Spider-Man seemed to be one that really just stuck with me. I think there was a little bit of he has my last name, and so we are the same. I am Peter Parker, I am Adam Parker, and so there was that excitement, and there was also sort of maybe hit the right time for me. So about 1994, the Spider-Man animated series came out,
right?
The 90s one, and I was 6-7 years old then, so it was sort of perfect age. It came on over here. I think it was on one of our channels called ITV, and it was after school, so I'd get home and it would be on telly. So it was just hit perfectly that there was this TV show on about this superhero that I'd kind of heard about, and it obviously in the public consciousness, and just fell in love with that show. It was that show and the X-Men animated series, I think, sort of on at the same time, and so those two gave me this obsession with Marvel that led to the next few Christmases being I want everything Spider-Man or X-Men related, basically, and Spider-Man seemed to be the dominant sort of character and figure in that early childhood obsession, so much so that one of my earliest memories is of playing with or memories from that time period anyway, about 6 or 7, was playing with my mom. Made me a Spider-Man base house thing out of a big cardboard box. So she bought this, I don't know where she got it from, a giant cardboard box. She put 2 levels in it, a like pretend fireman's pole. There was like webs hanging off of it. We drew spiders all over it, and then all my Spider-Man toys, I had probably about 6 or 7 different Spider-Man toys, would go into that base, that house. And I had that for awesome. Probably a couple of years. It was just completely homemade, but it was like my favorite toy growing up was this Spider-Man house, till it got eventually, so worn through use, it had to be thrown away. And I was a little bit older.
Right.
And comic books were quite hard to come by here in Britain, I'd say. I think we didn't have the same comic book culture as in America.
Gotcha.
So it wasn't something I could really get my hands on readily. So the TV series was my sort of main insight into Spider-Man. And then there are a few, like if you go to like a major city here, back in the 90s and the early 2000s, there might be 1 or 2 comic book shops in around. There was a small chain called Forbidden Planet that sold comics, but you couldn't pop to a sort of store nearby and get comics. We went on a holiday to America when I was about 10 or 11, went to Florida. We went back a few years over the next sort of 5 or 6 years. And every time we went, I'd collect, I'd say I'm saving up all my money, all my pocket money, all my savings. If I do some jobs and chores, I'll get some money. And I'd go over, when I'd go to America, I'd find a comic book store and just buy as many comics as I could, Spider-Man comics and X-Men comics and other Marvel, but Spider-Man was my favorite. So I'd have a big collection of Spider-Man comics, sort of random issues. So there's never any sense to it. It's just whatever I could find. Sometimes collections, sometimes single comics. If I found, a flea market in America that I could just, I've got, 10 for $2 here. I'm just going to get all the Spider-Man comics and take them home.
I know those well, Cool.
It was a bit of a sort of, haphazard obsession that sort of followed me through. And then the films started coming out, the video games, just as I was hitting, my teens, and it's just followed me through adulthood now as well.
Right on. So I'm actually kind of similar. First of all, let me say I really do like that cartoon from the 90s. You can still watch it on Disney Plus now, and so I got my kids are watching it with me. Some of it's kind of dark.
Yeah, it's surprisingly dark. I did watch some of it because of Disney Plus when that popped up. I watched some of that in the X-Men series, and I was like, I don't remember it being this creepy or scary. And also how many other Marvel characters pop up in it as well, which is quite cool. Like look now with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it's something but in the 90s that show had Captain America coming in and all different characters popping up in the X-Men, and that was really cool.
Yeah. So and I was the same way. X-Men was always another one of my very favorites. The cartoon, same thing. It was like, wow, this cartoon is awesome. It's really close to the comics. I didn't read Spider-Man comics as much, but my very first memory of Spider-Man is watching Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends with Firestar and Iceman back in the early 80s.
80s one,
And so we would play, like my cousins and I. So they were both older than I am, but the oldest, he wanted to be Iceman, and my cousin Belinda wanted to be Firestar. So that left me with Spider-Man, which was awesome because I wanted to be Spider-Man anyway. So it all worked out really well, and we would just pretend, and we would, the way you do when you're little, you run around pretending like you're webbing up and stuff like that,
Yeah, definitely.
So I have that memory, but also I remember getting the superpowers figure, or not superpowers. That's the Secret Wars.
Yes,
and so I used to have that one, and Doctor Doom, and I think Captain America, or a few others, and we would just fight, just make them fight each other. But then in the early 90s, comics, especially Marvel, X-Men, Spider-Man was really huge because of his marriage to Mary Jane. There was like that big issue that I still have somewhere here. But I remember they came out with those toys. It was a Toy Biz, I believe, was a company that created them. And so they had all those, and all his rogues gallery, which, I mean, except for Batman, I think Spider-Man has like the greatest rogues gallery ever.
Oh, agreed. Yeah. The most interesting, unusual characters. Like, again, a fun selection of animals as well for him to fight against as a spider. Yeah. And then just some very intriguing. My favorite's probably, I love Kraven the Hunter. Just something about this big game hunter, sinister figure that is out for the hunt, basically, more than anything. But yeah, Batman definitely top of the pile for villains, and I can't think of many other superheroes that come close to those two really in terms of villains. There's I suppose Flash I quite like, and he's got some interesting ones, but not nearly as many iconic villains compared to Spider-Man and Batman.
Well, just general population don't really know. I mean, if you were to say Captain Cold and Mirror Master and all that, I mean, they'd be like, what are you talking about? But
exactly,
you say Green Goblin and Dr. Octopus and the Lizard, and they're like, Spider-Man, of course.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I love. But You are right. There was a whole lot of animal villains there. Dr. Octopus, the lizard, the rhino,
Yeah, the vulture as
the
well. He's like the
vulture. Yeah.
vulture. Yeah.
But they're all really cool. Of course, most of them were designed by Steve Ditko.
Yeah.
Classic, just phenomenal artist there. Mostly known for Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. Of course, he went on later to do like the Question and the Creeper and stuff like that. But those were like his most famous, Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. And really, he kind of got to the point with Stan Lee, because Stan Lee famously actually created the character of Spider-Man, although he didn't have the design. Stan Lee went to Jack Kirby to, help design it. He didn't like his design, so he had Steve Ditko redo it, and Steve created the design that we know now, which one thing that I did learn that I never knew was that apparently it was going to be orange and purple originally in his costume.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then they changed it to the red and blue.
Yeah.
But Steve created that. He created that classic design that we know. But apparently, his relations with Stan were a little bit strained. So Stan would just kind of create like what's called the Marvel style. So he would just write like a little paragraph of the story, and then he'd send it to the artists, and then the artists basically would write the dialogue, create all the panels, do everything like that, which is very different from how it is nowadays, where everything is super scripted. They'll say like
the writer scripts the whole thing.
Exactly. So I thought that was really cool that basically Steve Ditko, he kind of co-wrote these things with Stan Lee.
Yeah. Again, Stan Lee was just the ideas, man. Just, I've got a great idea. Here's the idea. Chuck it at Steve, and then Steve has to make something of it. Yeah, exactly. Make it when I suppose Steve did make it work, they created iconic characters from the get-go pretty much. If you go right back to those early comics, you've still got those. Chameleon was the first one he faced, I think. And then
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was, and then the very early ones. I'm sure Vulture was super early.
Yeah,
Raven was super early. All these ones that have survived. None of them have died away in terms of they're still appearing in the comics and the films and the TV shows. So there's obviously a sort of long-lasting nature that Ditko created with them.
Yeah, and I'd say the only newer ones that really survived were maybe Venom and Carnage. The only real ones with real staying power.
Yeah. I haven't really I read a lot of the early comics, so I've I got the Marvel Unlimited app. Do you know that? Yeah. So it gives you every Marvel comic all the way back to the 60s. I'd sort of set a subscription up to that a few years ago when there was some deal. So it's, it's about, I think, sort of 60, 70 pounds for me a year, but it gives me access to every single Marvel comic. And so I reread using that, because I'd read a lot of sort of collected anthologies over the years and things again where I could get my hands on them. But then when I got the app about 5 or 6 years ago, I went back and reread quite a lot of those early comic books from the 60s through to the 80s and 90s of Spider-Man. And again, all of the villains I knew pretty much because they're just in the public eye, they're in the cartoons and stuff. And then I did try to read some of the more modern ones with some villains, and I was like, I don't know who these people are. There's Mr. Negative was the one he sounds quite interesting, but I think he was in the video game as well. But again, it hasn't really, I suppose. So maybe in 10 years' time, I'm not sure. But all the classic villains are still the same ones. Like you said, there's Venom and Carnage from the 90s, and all the rest of them were 60s, 70s creations, I think.
Pretty much, yeah. I really can't even think of one. It may be Moreland, I suppose, from but even then, he's not really, he hasn't really done much. So yeah, it really is just like Venom and Carnage are like the newest ones that have been attached to Spider-Man, and everything else is from the 60s and 70s. Yeah.
Again, I suppose because they're just timeless characters that Ditko and Stan Lee created. There's something inherently interesting about the work, Doc Octopus's character and his personality, or the Sandman's issues and stuff. There's just those characters have just got something about them that you can't really match.
Right. Or Norman Osborn and his just his mental issues. That's like one of the earliest characters really to kind of explore that mental instability. And so I that's just really interesting. It's kind of forward thinking as well. But Marvel back then, they were the house of ideas, and they weren't afraid to tackle things like that. So, Black Panther, one of the very first African
hero. Yeah. Even just one of the first African heroes to make it into the West.
Yeah. So, Marvel wasn't afraid to hit those issues. And so I really enjoy that Norman Osborn. He's kind of like Lex Luthor, but just crazy, which I really, which I like.
Yeah. Super genius, but super crazy at the same time.
That's right. It's like Moon Knight, Moon Knight's basically Batman, but also crazy. So,
but also crazy.
Yeah. So I really
Spider-Man as well. Spider-Man himself, he, at the time I was reading about him earlier, just again, sort of catching up on some of his early history. At the time, for a teenager to be a superhero, teenagers were sidekicks in comic books in the 60s. Right. It was Robin and Superboy, and they were the sidekicks, or the teenage sidekicks to the heroes. Right. Spider-Man was a teenager without, he wasn't a sidekick. He was the hero, even though he was a sort of 15, 16-year-old boy in the first comics. And that was quite groundbreaking. I think that was quite, sort of, which surprised no one had thought of it before, really. If you're trying to sell comics to teenagers, have the main character be a teenager. It's surprising that they hadn't thought about that, but it worked, obviously, because all of a sudden teenagers are finding associations with that. And again, I was a nerdy, geeky little kid, even as a sort of 7 or 8 year old. I was always a bit of a geek, a bit of a nerd. Yeah, me I was too. Sort of kid that, I liked to sit and read, liked to sci-fi, liked to play video games, liked to, watch my cartoons more than, going and playing sports and whatnot. So that spoke to me, as sort of Peter Parker, Spider-Man. I was like, yeah, that's me. That's the sort of person I am at school and probably will be. And if he can be a hero, so can I.
And then I think what also helped was that he had trouble he had like real world problems. How am I going to finish my homework? How am I going to pay these bills on time? Because we lost my uncle, one of the financial provider. So what are we going to do here?
Exactly. Having a horrible boss and having to deal with issues about exactly where my next check's coming from, and having to struggle with all sorts of things.
And then, oh no, the lizard ripped my costume. Now I got to sew it back up. You don't. You don't think about things like that with Batman.
No, there's no butler. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh man. And then the movies came out, and I loved those Tobey Maguire movies. I thought they were fantastic. Well, the first two. The third one,
less so. Yeah. Good. Some nice ideas in it, and I think some interesting things they tried to do. But overall, I did try watching it not too long ago again, and I just found myself laughing in large parts, which shouldn't really be happening. It wasn't meant to be comedic, right. But I found myself laughing at lots of parts of it. But yeah, the first two films were. Like I remember seeing the first one in the cinema. I do remember going to see it with a couple of friends, I think. And again, that excitement of seeing a big screen superhero, and came out just thrilled. It was funny. It was adventurous. It was exciting. It was, it was a big, fun blockbuster action film for the family in a way as well, which is quite nice to see. And I remember then when I think I went to go see it again like a couple of weeks later. I made my sister and at the time her. I think boyfriend and now my brother-in-law go see it with me. I was like, should we go see a film? I was like, yeah, let's go see Spider-Man. And they were like, you've already seen it 2 weeks ago. I was like, but I want to see it again, and you haven't seen it, so let's go again.
That's right.
There's that excitement.
Yeah, that was one of those where the cast was perfect. I thought everything about it was done very, very well. I mean, Willem Dafoe as Norman Osborn, that's amazing. But then part 2 came out, and again, it like just nailed everything. Dr. Octopus was menacing, but he wasn't like just purely evil, which he's really not in the comics. He's really not purely evil either. There's some actual depth to him, and I thought they kind of captured that pretty well as well. But just everything about it was really, really well done. And so again, it was like, they got it right. This is, they can do no wrong here. And then of course part 3 came out.
They I think they reached for the stars a little bit too. It was like Icarus reaching for the sun or something, wasn't it? It was that you're going a little bit too above here. I think they just tried to put too many people in.
So they definitely did.
Sort of tried to sort of stuff too much story in, and it just the dancing scene is the scene that the scene where he dances.
The infamous.
Just why? Scene, like who watched that back and thought, yeah, this looks cool. That's exactly what cool is, and that's what we should be showing off.
Well, I know Avi Arad famously wanted Venom in there. He was like, Venom sells, put Venom in there. Yeah. And at the time they weren't going to. It was just going to be Sandman and the repercussions with the second Green Goblin. Or whatever, I forgot what they call him, like New Goblin or something like that. But it was going to be the main villain there, and so they kind of had to just shove him in, and I don't know. I think Topher Grace was miscast as Eddie Brock. Yeah. There was it just didn't feel right to me. But then they tried rebooting it with Andrew Garfield, and of course we had those 2 films, and I didn't think it was terrible. The Lizard I actually thought was pretty good. Again, part 2, then it also seemed like they tried to stuff too much into it.
Too much in, yeah.
Mhm.
Again, it's the same. It was exactly the same for me with those films. Exactly the same. Like
Yeah.
they're fine, they're
Mhm.
okay. I quite like Andrew Garfield in it. I think he makes quite an interesting Spider-Man and Peter Parker. He's quite a bit sort of spunky and fun and lively,
Right.
and I quite like him as an actor. But again, it didn't seem to spark with me in the same way that the first films and the later films did. Yeah, there was just something missing a little bit. It was a bit, I don't know, corporate, a bit sort of structural about the films, about the way they were put together, about the way they'd been sort of created, a bit too controlled, almost a bit less fun and exciting.
It also seemed like they were just trying too hard to set up the Sinister Six, that they didn't really focus on their movie. They're just like, oh, well, this is going to happen. It's going to be awesome. But, instead of
chuck it all in.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. Instead of just like, let's take care of this movie. We'll make sure it's the best one we can put out. And then, we'll be able to go from there. Which, I mean, even Marvel Studios has done that too. Iron Man 2 felt very much like just a setup movie for the Avengers. And it really was. But now with Tom Holland, I really enjoyed his Peter Parker as well. And I thought his version has been really well done.
Again, I like how they went so young with him, I suppose. The first two, Tobey Maguire, even in the first, going back and look at it, he doesn't look that young. Like at the time, I thought he was young. I don't know why, but going back and watching it again, I'm like, oh, he still looks like, in his early 20s, even in the first film when he's meant to be a 16, 17-year-old.
Right.
And Andrew Garfield, again, he sort of, looks a bit like an adult trying to be a teenager, a bit more young, I think, right, but looks like an adult trying to be a teenager a bit too much. Big hair, sticking his hair up and whatnot, and dressing in some young people's clothes. But Tom Holland is an actual teenager, or he was an actual teenager, and he, completely embodied that slight, small, nerdy, geeky, tiny teenager that perfectly, in a way.
Yeah, he had that awkwardness. He had that, just that kind of nervousness. That I thought was just amazing. And of course, Michael Keaton. How can you go wrong with Michael Keaton in anything?
No, yeah. I just watched Beetlejuice again recently, and I love him in that.
He's so good.
To Batman, and now Vulture. He's a great character. He's a surprisingly good character actor. I think people forget, because he was Batman and Beetlejuice, which are quite overblown characters, I suppose, quite over the top, quite exaggerated. How good of a proper character actor he can be, how he can drop into a role so well.
Right.
He's brilliant.
And I remember him from Mr. Mom. I think that was like my first exposure to him. Mr. Mom, and then Gung Ho. I don't know if you ever saw Gung Ho.
No, I never saw Gung Ho.
Yeah, it's about like the American car industry, where some Japanese businessmen actually buy him out. And so they're going to close the plant and just make everything in Japan unless they can produce up to the Japanese standards. It's really, and he's like the head of the company, or like the head foreman or kind of guy, and so it's up to him really to kind of work it all out. And I mean, it's a good one. But
never heard of it. Yeah, I'll add it to my list, my Michael Keaton list.
So then that one, and then of course part 2 was good with Jake Gyllenhaal as Mysterio. I've been waiting for them to do Mysterio, so when that came out, that was super cool. And now I'm very excited for this third one here as well.
Yeah, I really hope it doesn't, do a number 3 from the first set of films and try too much, because again, they're chucking in quite a lot, aren't they?
They are.
But I've trusted them so far. You've had to with what they've been with what they've done with the films and the characters. So I'm just going to have to trust them and go and see it. And fingers crossed, it's going to be a good one.
Yes, I agree. Fingers crossed. That's basically all we can do.
My one sort of thing I was thinking about the other day, actually, I was talking to some friends about the Spider-Man films, about how Peter Parker is especially when he's at first at school, he's the super geek, he's the super nerd. Mm-hmm. No one looks twice at him. But the problem is, Tom Holland and Andrew Garfield especially are super good looking, which I'm. They're both really good looking guys. I'm like, at least Tobey Maguire looked a bit more normal, a bit more average Joe in a way. I don't know, something about him. He's not ugly at all. He's a fine looking chap, but he's a bit more plain looking compared to Garfield and Holland, who are actually very good looking people, which always makes me go, I
get it.
Not quite Peter Parker in a weird way, even though it is Peter Parker. It is, something about that always sort of makes me think he's too good looking for this. Which again, in the comics, I suppose he did get more and more good looking as he was drawn. I think as he grew up and became an adult. Again, reading this one, he's drawn as quite a good looking adult, I suppose.
Well, yeah. So I mean, I know one of the reasons they kind of went for the younger superhero as well, besides that demographic, and hitting that demographic was also so that they could age him up as he progressed, which again is like a really cool concept because that really wasn't done. It's almost like that infinite, endless time for most comic characters. But they wanted to see the progression, and they did the same thing with the X-Men as well, because the X-Men were technically teenagers when they first started, although now they're adults and have their own children and stuff like that. But in this particular issue that we're going to be talking about, this Christmas issue from 1989, which again, because of publication delays and the way things work out, it's funny that the Christmas issue came out in April of 1989.
Yeah, I noticed that. Yeah, on the front cover, I was like, what April?
yeah, and that's just by the time everything's done, and then goes to.
I think that happens sometimes because I think I've again reading on the apps or the old comics a few times. I've been like, this looks like a Christmas issue, but it's out in June or something.
Yeah, exactly, and that's the reason. But here it's like he's already grown up. He's married to MJ, to Mary Jane.
Yeah.
And MJ is Mary Jane. It's not Michelle or whatever from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But they're actually married, and which is kind of very different from when they first started out. They're in high school. MJ kind of has a crush on him, but also he's really more into Gwen Stacy.
Yeah. And again, I think that's what makes Spider-Man so interesting is those relationships and characters that come in and out of the story. You've got the whole Gwen Stacy situation, what happened to her and how that affected him. And then all his group of friends like Flash and Liz. And, there's all these really interesting characters that make the world real and make it seem a lot more realistic than your average superhero story, right. As well as him having to deal with all those issues. He's got his friends and having to worry about them, and they have lots of problems going on as well that he has to sometimes, they're part of the story as much as anything else in the story, which I think fleshes out that character and that world to make it a lot more interesting. And as you said, it's almost like as the audience grew up as well, those kids in the 60s, probably growing up in the 70s and 80s were growing up and getting married and moving on with their lives and continuing to buy Spider-Man to an extent. It was still very popular.
Yeah.
Well, he definitely was, because he had a cartoon in '67. It's the very famous Spider-Man theme, which I like how every single movie iteration has included some sort of.
Gotta get that riff in,
yeah. You got to get it in, just that little minor blues. So there was that one. Then there was I think on the Electric Company they had a brief. They would have like a few skits every once in a while for a few years. But then we got the Spider-Man TV show from like 78, 79-ish, which again, I remember watching. Of course they aired before I was born, but I remember watching them in reruns and just like wanting, it was like, wow, the Spider-Man, and he's like real,
Yeah, that was a live action one, was that the live action Spider-Man? Yeah, I've seen some, I've never seen the episodes, but I've seen clips of it on YouTube and stuff,
They're of their time.
Of their time, yeah.
That's about what you can say.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it was kind of like it was around that time with Wonder Woman TV show and the Incredible Hulk, and of course, I think CBS also had Shazam and Isis on at the same time. They were doing that made-for-TV Doctor Strange movie, the made-for-TV Captain America movie.
Yeah, the Captain one, I've seen that. Yeah.
that's another
fun.
one.
It's a fun watch, yeah.
Yeah, that's another one that's definitely of its time, but. But yeah, so I mean, there was just a ton of those IPs, those comic IPs that were just done as made for TV movies, and I guess you could kind of get away with it without the huge budget, but at the same time, it's like, did it really work? I don't know. I don't know if I could say, but Spider-Man went on to get his own cartoons.
Yeah,
as I mentioned, Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, and then of course later on he went to that 1994. Or 95 one, which was fantastic. I thought they did a great job. And one of the things that they and the X-Men one did really well was they would take the comic storylines, and we'll get into this comic and this issue in a little bit, but they would take those comic storylines and adapt them to TV. And I thought that both of them were very close to the source material.
Yeah, they used it really well. Again, that was like, things like the Secret Wars being used, and I think Kraven's Last Hunt, and the Clone Saga, and all those things that I didn't read the comics because I didn't have access to them because they weren't here. So I found out of them through that, and then later when I went back and read the comics, this was that story from that. Oh yeah, that was in that episode. And I'd remember them from the TV show. So, quite I suppose a different way around than most people might have done it if they read the comics first.
Right. Well, and I'm glad you mentioned Craven's Last Hunt, because that's one that I would love to see live action. I mean,
Yeah,
that's just begging for an awesome. I mean, because it's just a classic storyline. It's really well written, and I mean, it's yeah, that would be perfect. But
yeah, that'd be great.
I don't know who I'd cast as Craven though.
No, you need someone physical and quite, sinister as well.
Yeah, yeah. Colin Farrell? No, not Colin Farrell. Gerard Butler, maybe. I don't know.
Maybe, yeah, that might work. Yeah, yeah. Someone with a sort of intimidation factor about them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it might
be too old. Do you know Mads Mikkelsen? Do you know Mads Mikkelsen?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah, he might be a bit too old potentially, but someone like him potentially, someone that sort of physicality and a very sinister sort of vibe.
And Mads Mikkelsen, I really wanted him to be Doctor Doom, and then of course he was just Julius. But I thought he would have been a fantastic, Victor Von Doom.
Yeah.
But we're actually here to talk about Spider-Man, a particular issue from April of 1989. So it was technically the 1988 Christmas issue, which is it's funny. But this was an odd one because Spider-Man kind of loses his Christmas spirit, but there's no real villain. I mean, there's like small-time crooks, which Spider-Man's good at taking down small-time crooks. But like I was expecting as I was going through it, I wanted like just a big villain to come in, and we didn't get one of his like classic rogues, which I thought was kind of
no. Yeah. The villain is sort of, I don't know, his own sadness, I suppose.
That's exactly right. It's really just more his dealing with his Christmas blues.
Exactly, yeah. And then a few street thug robbers.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess we can just go ahead and jump into it.
Yeah. I just on the front cover. Did you notice on the top left front cover? They have like a little picture of Spider-Man, and on the top left front cover is he's wearing he's got a Santa hat.
He's got the Santa hat, yeah.
And it's a mistletoe, and he's holding the tiniest present as well. So it's just I quite like they changed that for the front cover. That little guessing still image of Spidey they'd usually have.
Yeah, and I forgot the name. It's usually those little boxes that are done right above the price and all that. There's actually an actual name for that little box. I just can't remember it at the moment, but I've always enjoyed when they've done fun things like that, or whenever they change it up. So like for the Avengers, their lineup, they would have the different different heads in there,
members. Yeah,
same thing with the X-Men.
The X-Men, I remember some of them being quite different.
Yeah, so you're right. So I'm glad you brought that up, because Spidey in a Santa hat is, I think I have like one or two ornaments from Hallmark with Spidey.
Oh, really?
In Santa hats, hanging upside down with presents, things like that. So but so the comic starts off, and it's kind of a continuation, just like comics always are. It's kind of a continuation of a previous storyline where Mary Jane's and Peter's, the owner of their building, so I guess they're super, or they're renter.
Landlord.
Landlord, that's the word. Yeah, their landlord. He had tried to kidnap Mary Jane. In fact, the only reason they got that apartment in the first place was because he had like a huge obsession with Mary Jane, and so that's how they even got this ridiculously expensive but relatively cheap apartment in the city. And so he had tried to kidnap her, and so this is where we start off. They confront him, they get him arrested, and now as kind of revenge, because he can't have the woman that he wants, he evicts them.
The good old Christmas Eve eviction as well, of all evictions.
That's right. Yeah, that's one of those classic. Oh no,
it's like something of a Christmas special or something, evicting the people on Christmas Eve.
Yeah,
Scrooge, very Scrooge-like, isn't it?
With their little frostbitten teddy bears.
Exactly.
Yeah. So his lawyer is handing them the papers, and of course Peter's furious, and I mean he wants to hurt this guy, even though I mean, there's not really much he can do about it.
Holding back that spider strength, I think, when he grabs him at that point,
Which is one of those things which always, I mean, that's one of those, like, how do you hold back that kind of strength? Like today, as I was taking my daughter to school, they have to wear the masks, but every time I put one on, my wife ties the end so that it fits my 2-year-old.
Yeah.
And every time I try to put it on, I always end up tearing like one of those little pieces there. And so then she ends up having to use one of the masks from school,
from school.
extras that they have. And so it's funny. It's like, I'm not even trying and it's happening. How does Spider-Man
not tear doors off handles as he walks around?
exactly. It's him and Superman. I don't know how they do it, but that's some crazy self-control there. So they're talking with they talk with Aunt May, and she offers them, there's a room, his old room that she never rented out, that they can come stay. And Peter says, well, we already have a place to stay. Don't worry about it. And really, he's just saying that because he's kind of embarrassed to go back home. He feels he's moved on. He's now grown up. And at the same time, he doesn't want to burden his aunt. So it's kind of a pride thing, kind of a little bit like, well, I don't want to be too much of a burden as well. And so a lot of the rest of the issue is him like trying to figure out where he's going to stay.
And trying to, again, interacting with all of those side characters, those extra people that pop up in and out of Spider-Man comics all the time.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Flash Thompson earlier, because they they weren't enemies, but they were kind of antagonistic towards each other. And even though they still hung out, but as time progressed, they ended up growing really close and becoming pretty good friends. So much so that he is one of the people that Peter asks to stay with as well.
Yeah. You see that change in their relationship, which again is I suppose the skill of a story being told over such a long period of time, that you can have those character changes and developments.
Yeah. So we cut to, which I think is supposed to be a play on J.C. Penney's. But
I was about to ask you that. Yeah, is that a real J.C. Herdling? Is that a real department store in America? No,
I've never heard of J.C. Herdling.
I've heard of J.C. Penney's. I've been there when I went to America. I do remember that place.
Yeah, and even those are already kind of falling. Well, more and more places are going online.
Yeah.
But I think it's supposed to be that. I'm not positive though. Perhaps there's a place in New York called that. I've never heard of it though. So he's like, and I love how it's owned by Howell Thurston III.
Yeah.
Instead of Thurston Howell III.
Yeah, exactly. A proper evil name, that isn't it as well. Anything with like the third or something that just makes it more sinister. Even though he's not a bad guy, he's just being portrayed
rich,
in the exactly, a rich, don't care about people, where just want money.
Well, and it's a play on the Gilligan's Island character as well, Thurston Howell III.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of little things here and there. It's I don't know about Dave Michelinie when he was writing this. He's like, what's a good name? How about I need a rich person name, Thurston Howell. Well, let me just switch him. Yeah, it's funny there, but they're getting ready to transport all the receipts and everything of the day to to the bank, take them to the bank's vaults. And so he entrusts it to his aide, Clark. And I guess Clark is like the main physical villain of the story here. He's kind of the mastermind.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the mastermind in a very minor way, but the put upon clerk, assistant to the boss.
Right.
I don't know. Was Clark? Is that meant to be a Clark Griswold? I don't know. Is that was my very? I'm reaching, I think there, but
that might be a reach,
employee at Christmas time. I was like, whenever I think of the name Clark, though, it's either Clark Kent or Clark Griswold. They're the two names in my head.
Yeah, no, you're right. Same thing with me. I don't know any other Clarks. Well, maybe Clark Gable, I guess.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah.
I suppose, but no, same thing. I usually think Clark Kent or Clark Griswold. I don't know. Well, the first two Lampoon movies had come out by this time. The third one was either just released or was about to be released.
Yeah, about this time.
I don't know if people would have associated it with Christmas yet.
No.
But I don't know. Maybe the fact that he's kind of a nerdy, weak guy.
Yeah, put upon worker.
Is like a jab at Clark Kent, maybe?
maybe. There's a DC attack.
That's right. Yeah. So he's in charge of it, and I love how he's like, oh yeah, I'll handle it, and it cuts to the frame of just showing the gun in the briefcase, and nothing suspicious there.
I think he says, I'm going to find this especially rewarding.
That's what
he says. Yeah. I like that phrase, rewarding, just on its own next to the gun.
That's right. Well, half of the battle in making these comics is just where you place your text.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Yeah, the clever text, and I think there's some really good ones in this of Marvel generally. But the way they use the text bubbles and use the spacing on a page is very interesting.
Well, and this was still that era where Marvel was still really creative, and they were still unique in trying to do things. Like the last, I'd say, 10 years, they've kind of copied themselves over and over again, but not in the good way. Like not in the, this is our method, let's use this method. More in the, we need an idea. How about Civil War II?
Yeah. Same things over and over again.
Right. But this, and I should mention, because on that next page after that whole rewarding thing, that's where we get the drawing of this gentleman here. And I love this drawing because it's like vintage Todd McFarlane. So I guess I should mention that this was that era when Dave Michelinie was writing and Todd McFarlane really came to prominence. Like this kind of catapulted him to superstardom, his Spider-Man stuff. And a lot of it was because he would draw Spider-Man in like these, interesting poses.
Yeah.
And so it was like very acrobatic. You kind of a little more dynamic.
There's that sense of agility and movement, I think, in the positioning, and again, a lot more exciting to see on the page. His poses and movement. There's a couple of like images and stills in here that I did think, as I was rereading it, like, wow, just what a cool looking shot of Spider-Man or Peter Parker as well.
Yeah. But you can tell it's Todd McFarlane, not only from his Spider-Man poses, but also because of the way he draws some of like his everyday chaps, and they with their particular style of nose, with the, they're a little bit bigger, they're kind of broader, and
I think I'm looking at the guy you're thinking of. I think you are. Yeah, I've just brought it up on my phone on my app. Yeah. So the guy that's got his hat on. Did you see what was on his hat?
No. What does it say?
He's got a baseball cap on, and it says "Tell someone who cares" is what it says on the baseball cap. It's perfect. Again, that little bit of characterization in that.
Classic New Yorker.
Yeah,
I'm just kidding. I love you, New Yorkers. But we cut to Peter and MJ walking through the park, and they're kind of, he's listing some of his troubles, and they're talking it out, and she's like, well, no, let's go ahead and go to the party, let's have some fun, kind of a thing. I don't want to think about all this trouble that we're having. And of course, this is where we again, because you got to have a little bit of action in these comic books here, and so there's like a mugging going on, and so Peter does a quick change, and we get another classic pose there with his just the way he's bent, it's like he really is swinging, with his his right leg out and his left leg behind him and everything. And
I remember when I was a kid, and there was a brief time when I was a kid where I wanted to be a comic book illustrator. After reading these comic books, I was a bit like, I can do that. And then tried and just couldn't matter. And I try and use images like this, definitely. Like Spider-Man was one of my big ones I'd look at. And who else was the other one I used to try and draw? The Flash I'd try and draw sometimes as well, for that motion.
Nice, yeah.
And I just couldn't get it right, though. Like, it was something about the legs and the feet and that movement. I just could never get it right. I could do pretty much faces, torsos quite well. Mm-hmm. As soon as it came to the feet, the hands, the movement of the legs and stuff, I just something about it I couldn't crack as a, budding illustrator. So I changed to being a writer instead. I decided to write instead, and now I teach English. So it's all gone that way.
There you go. So the writing actually kind of paid off.
Yeah.
And I was the same way. I always drew. I love to draw. And so I would do the same thing. I would find some of these poses and I would start copying them. And I kind of, the feet were always hardest.
Yeah.
Hands, I weren't quite as hard, but to me, like getting the feet and the faces right were the hardest, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And so, but some of these poses were, there was no way that I could visualize it at the time.
No.
At least back then. So I definitely agree with that. And I feel your pain.
I even had a book, which I think I bought in America, again, one of the first times I went, which was like How to Draw Marvel or something. It was one of those. Yeah. It was on like a binder type thing. I loved it. We used that so much, and it had like, all the different rules, like the rules of heads and the rules of shapes. And it was a great book, but it didn't make me any better. it was fun to use. I used to, just sit and draw with it and practice drawing heads and figures and superheroes of my own and stuff. But it was a Marvel style one. So it was, drawing the Hulk and drawing Spider-Man and drawing Captain America. So that was really fun.
That is cool. I remember seeing those because we'd go on vacation sometimes, and we'd stop in random shops, and I always remember, especially like if we would stop at like a Hobby Lobby or like a craft shop, they always had those like near the colored pencils. So I always preferred to use like colored pencils when I would color the all my drawings. I didn't like to use crayons. I didn't really like to use markers, but for some reason colored pencils I really liked. So we'd go to like specialty art stores sometimes, and they'd have all those books that you're talking about, that style. And they were always so much fun, trying to copy it and learning about the shapes, drawing the shapes first.
Exactly.
And all that. So he stops the mugging. The lady is very thankful and gives him a little present of cookies. And again, the way she's drawn, something about this lady, I don't know what it is with McFarlane, but his everyday characters, they're just
very distinctive.
That's the nicest way to say it. Yes.
Odd nose on her, I can say. Odd smile as well. It's quite a bit creepy when you zoom in on it.
It's definitely creepy. Yeah. Yeah. Guys, it's on page 9 if you get a chance to look at it, and it's odd.
I like how on the page before as well, the references to 80s I know celebrities he mentions. So he talks about wishing to have bigger shoulders. Chuck Norris, Mike Tyson, and Bridget Nielsen are the 3 that he mentioned.
I may or may not be doing that later. But yeah, it is funny, the all the references in here.
You can sort of often tell a Spider-Man comic, especially by the references, because he's such a quick wit and sort of snarky jokes that he makes. They're often alluding to the amount of times when I was reading through the comics again, I was reading through back through the comics, and there'd be references to Donald Trump in the 80s and 90s about being wealthy. It was, if you were wealthy, you were a Donald Trump, and looking back at that, that's
funny.
From a modern perspective, it's like, oh yeah, he used to just be a rich man that was just a state tycoon. That was it. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden he was on The Apprentice, I think. So he saves the day. He was given I think it was a box of cookies, right? And so he's on his way, and then of course we cut to a couple of panels of that truck, the armored car with all the stuff in it, all the money.
The money
being driven away, and of course the guards are all tied up. And then we have and I like this part. This is like where Peter is trying to like find where he's going to stay, and so he's at the Christmas party, and he's like talking to the different people, and as it's literally just like a panel with each one, and as he's talking with them, it's just his inner monologue thinking, well, maybe I could stay with them. No, I can't. They're doing this. Maybe I could stay with her. No, I can't as well. So like they even think of Mary Jane's cousin, because I think Joy, it's one of the supporting characters that's not like super popular. Joy, I think Mercado or something like that.
Joy Mercado, yeah.
And so he's like, we could stay with her. Like, no, I already have trouble with MJ's cousin who kind of has a crush on me. So staying with another girl probably wouldn't be good. And
everyone has a crush on Peter now. Yeah,
exactly. He grew up. not as awkward, I suppose.
I realized during this scene as well, how many of his friends have horrible things happen to them as well. Like they talk about Joe and Martha Robinson, their kid is on trial because I think he was Rocket Racer. Was that who
I think you're right. Yeah,
he was on trial, and then later they talk about his place has been trashed, and they just keep mentioning people about how horrible things have happened to them, and they're like, it doesn't really seem well to do doesn't do well to be a good friend of Peter Parker.
Well, and that's one of the long running bits in the comic is the Parker luck. How he's got like terrible luck.
Everything goes wrong about this guy, to him and his mates and his wife,
his friends.
Apart from J. Jonah Jameson, he just rolls through it all basically.
And I guess when he was on the Avengers, they had it okay.
Had a little bit of. I'm just reading that, but actually, I've just been reading that series of the new Avengers. And it's very different storyline in the first Spider-Man there.
Yes, definitely. That whole team, that whole dynamic was pretty cool. I enjoyed it, and I liked it better than the stuff they did in the '90s for sure. The 90s I thought were great for the X-Men. For the Avengers, okay.
Spider-Man went a little bit all over the place. The weird stuff about trying to, again, it went a bit extreme, I believe was the word that was thrown around a lot for that era of
in the 90s. Everything was extreme in the 90s. Oh man. So finally he goes to Flash Thompson, and Flash is like, hey, my place is trashed from and I think it was from like the Inferno event that had happened around that time.
Yeah, it might have been, yeah.
So like some demons attacked his place or something like that. But so he's like, I've been staying here at the gym, but hey, you can take this and I'll go stay at the YMCA, no big deal. And so I was like, man, Flash Thompson and Peter's relationship really has grown from that.
Yeah.
When we first
and Flash has become such a good guy as well, compared to he was just an absolute bully to Peter and just a horrible guy in the 60s and start of the 70s. And here he is, teaching kids and offering his place and all sorts.
Well, he joined the military, didn't he? And I think that kind of like straightened him out. Is that what it was? Yeah. Because later on, after Eddie Brock is separated from the Venom symbiote,
yes, I've heard about that.
He emerges with Flash Thompson, and so he becomes Agent Venom for a while.
Yeah, I've never read that one yet, but that's on my list to read. I'm quite excited to read that. It sounds quite intriguing.
It's definitely different, but it's not too bad. No. So of course the armored car's robbed. Peter, at this point, he doesn't know anything about the armored car, but he's still very down. So he goes to Uncle Ben's grave to kind of, get some wisdom and just talk it out. And he sees.
I love that splash page. It's just a whole page of him at the grave.
Just him at the
grave.
Again,
it's just quite nice to it's quite an adult way of sort of showing a comic book, I suppose. It's just him standing in front of the grave. You've got the leaves and the wind behind him, and it's just quite striking as an image. I think to show that sort of thing in a comic book, and again shows the sort of character he is, which makes him more interesting and more rounded as a character, I think.
I agree. I mean, we all have to deal with death and losing a loved one. And unfortunately for Spider-Man, that's one that's kind of haunted him forever because he could have stopped, his uncle's murder and didn't. So there's like that connection there that's a little bit deeper than some of the others when they lose their loved ones. Then this is where Clark, after this, Clark kind
pulls
of
that gun,
pulls a gun on his boss, and
did you notice the sound effect, which I wrote down? What's it? The sound effect when he puts the gun in? Poink is what it says. Poink, and he pushes the gun in the boss's side. And I was like, poink! What a weird little phrase. I love the sound effects in comic books, but
they're always
poink.
Interesting. So Spider-Man's his webs are characterized by that thwip, like THWIP
thwip sound. Yep.
Of course, Wolverine is famous for his snicked sound, but there's always all sorts of funny.
I think there's a fun one later. There's some sort of crash. I don't know. Maybe we'll cut off scree. I think when there's a crash.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I think it is scree. Yeah. It's great. I love the whoever writing that. You're like, what's the sound of a gun poking in someone's belly? What's the sound of a car skidding? It's great. Love it.
I don't know how you come up with it, but okay.
Yeah.
So the guards they're robbing the place. They take a Santa, like a department store Santa, hostage.
Of all the people they could take on Christmas Eve, Santa Claus.
I mean, no one's gonna hurt you if you got a Santa. So Peter hears the siren. He catches up with them. Of course, he stops them, and we get some really cool pages of like the guys wrapped completely in Peter's webbing.
It's almost like a horror movie. Yeah. You see like him from above, and then a gun, and then strung up. We don't actually see Spider-Man in those scenes. It's almost a bit like how powerful he is, how sneaky he is,
stealthy. Yeah. And you're right. There is kind of a horror aspect to it, which if you're a criminal, I mean, I completely get it. It's like you can't see this guy. He's all over the place. Things are happening fast.
Yeah, it's a bit Batman-like, I suppose. It reminds me of Batman.
It is, yeah. And I can see why. He really doesn't have to do much. He can just use his webs and kind of grab someone. And you'd never know. But even the angles that some of these guys are like tied to the trees at, I mean, I felt bad for their backs. Like they're totally going to have some back issues, I think. But
they should sue, I think, later, maybe. Yeah.
I think they could if they knew who he was. But,
yeah, exactly. That's the secret identity. Did you notice that one of them was called Kermit as well?
I did notice one was called Kermit. Yes.
Was that a common name, or was like?
I've only met like one guy named Kermit before, in my whole life. So I don't know if it's that common.
No,
maybe it's more common in in that area. But...
Maybe 1980s New York had a lot of thugs called Kermit going around.
I could be. I don't know. But I love the pose of Spidey after like he takes out that last guard, and it's like that kind of crouching position, and I mean, it's classic like superhero pose, but at the same time, he's there in the snow. He's got the snow
full of
on
tension.
top of him.
Yeah,
it's great. And the issue overall wasn't super Christmassy, until the end. But that in the snow there, that kind of actually, I really dug that. I kind of got a little bit of like, Christmas Carol vibes with the snow.
Yeah. It is a cool setting.
Yeah. So of course he manages to take everybody out. It's just Clark left. Clark's going to run, and then Clark's taken out by the Santa that was held hostage.
Yeah.
And I love the Santa's line about how us heroes got to stick together.
Yeah.
Because I just picture like a thick New York accent, like a Brooklyn accent or something.
Yeah,
like
I think he says, "Don't mention it." Even don't mention it. You can imagine that. Yeah. And ho 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 dirtbag is what he says as well.
Yes, he does. Yeah,
that's perfect. That's my Santa. That is there. Yeah, ho 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 dirtbag. Yeah, action Santa.
Yeah, we gotta make that a thing.
Yeah. Well, Santa's actually a character in Marvel, isn't he?
He is.
He's in the comic, because one of the things I was reading recently was
he's an Omega level mutant, actually.
Yes, the Marvel Comics compendium, and it's all the different characters, and Santa Claus is included, and it talks about his backstory. And even in the backstory, it makes a little brief reference to Santa Claus the movie, which I sent to the Santa by the Minute guys.
Nice.
And it has all his superpowers. And I did read one, I think it was a holiday special I read last year, and it was him
with the gauntlet.
With the gauntlet, the Infinity Gauntlet, becoming supremely powerful.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah.
His reindeer like taken out, and so he needs help delivering the presents, and so they lend him like the Infinity Gauntlet, and he kind of is driven mad by
power. Yeah.
That's a good one. But in the end, Iron Man makes some robotic reindeer, and he's sent on his way. So Peter, he gets out of his costume. He's going back to Uncle Ben's grave, and this is where he meets Aunt May, who apparently has been going there every year since Uncle Ben's death, but never told Peter about it because she, Christmas was a special time, and he was always so excited. She didn't want to ruin it like at all, which that's like the quintessential, motherly, parental figure.
Yeah.
I mean, we try to protect our kids as much as possible. We do things that if we're having, money issues or whatever, we always try to protect our children, So the fact that she was lonely and miserable and sad and didn't want, Peter feeling any of that, especially around Christmas time. I mean, that just makes me love Aunt May even more.
Yeah.
But
she's just the best. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is still when Aunt May looked like Aunt May and not like Marissa
an old
Tomei.
lady. Yeah.
But he's got the whole inner monologue of, wow, she's she loves me. It would be so much if we moved in with her. She would love it. It would make her very happy. And so he
sort of stops thinking about himself, I think, here as well. Like,
I think you're right.
But my issues, my problems, and now he's thinking about her and her offer.
Exactly. So he takes her up on the offer, and then we get like the most Christmassy scene in the whole thing. It's at their house. There's like a little party going on, and
a perfectly conical Christmas tree, as always is drawn in these things.
Of course, it's got to be fake.
Pyramid.
It's got to be a fake.
It's got to be, yeah.
And Peter and MJ share a kiss, and Aunt May kind of gets after them for not doing it under the mistletoe, and and then that's it. Venom's.
And then the cheesy. I like the cheesy last line. The love is in here. Is that final line?
Course,
it's proper cheesy. Wink of the eye at the camera. Last moment in a comedy show, isn't it?
You got to do it if it's a Christmas special. You got it. Yeah. And then that's the episode, or the issue. So I quite enjoyed it, actually. I thought
it's
fun.
Nice. Yeah,
it's nothing special, but
no,
still fun.
Yeah, it's nice story moments, nice character moments. Again,
right.
It's the strength of the characters, even though, like you said, it doesn't have a great villain or great, big action set piece at its center. The strength of the supporting cast and Aunt May, and that you care for that dilemma more so than you might in other comic books when they're trying to shoehorn in an episode, like an issue like this, where they may be not putting in a big supervillain that you're waiting for, but because you care about the character so much and you know the characters as well, that when you read it you're engaged. Now, I hadn't read the ones before that in quite a while, but I was still feeling that sadness and that happiness and that sentimentality with Aunt May at the grave and him at the grave. That was all still there for me. and talking to his friends and engaging with them. It all worked because those characters have been developed over such a long period of time.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And I like when they do these more character driven issues, that like they'll usually have like a big story arcs, and then all of a sudden, it's back to the, they need to kind of slow it down. Usually it's like a fill-in writer. At this point, Dave Michelinie has been on the book for a couple of years. I think it was like 87 is when he and McFarlane took it over. But he nails Peter Parker. He nails everything about Spider-Man in general. And it's a nice continuity from the Ditko, Lee earlier stuff. Yeah,
and we didn't get a chance to talk about J. Jonah Jameson as well, but in this issue, again, he's anytime he pops up in an issue of Spider-Man, I'm happy generally because he's just one of my favorite non-superhero comic characters of all time. He's
a great character. He's ridiculous in his obsession, but at the same time, he adds like some comic relief. Yeah, but also, the aggression that you kind of need.
I love how he's excited about the party because it's tax deductible, is what he says. So again, it's all about profit for him. It's all about money.
Yeah,
and I use him. So I teach media studies at my school. I've just started teaching.
Oh, okay.
And we were teaching. I was trying to teach them about how news organizations have biased opinions. And, they are, 15, 16 years old. So maybe they're not fully engaged in politics. They don't really understand the right wing, left wing and how newspapers present that. Because it's just, when you're young, a few of them knew, but not many did.
Right.
And then I had a brainwave and I talked about J. Jonah Jameson and Daily Bugle and his newspaper and how he presents Spider-Man in this negative way. Most of them had seen the films and knew the character and stuff. And a few of them had read the comics and watched the TV shows as well. So that was a really good way of teaching them about propaganda in the media and how, a newspaper can have a political or a biased opinion, present that to the public, and that affects the public, and the public then think that's what's right, even though it's not, if that makes sense. Yep. It was really good. It was really like, we looked at a couple of scenes from the original Spider-Man films and a few comic book panels to say, this is an example of propaganda in the media and newspapers. So yes, learning methods. Yeah,
that's cool. So when I was a band director, one of the classes I had to teach was music history and music theory. So I guess 2 classes, but it was to kids that just needed a credit. They didn't know anything about music, they didn't care about music. They just needed a credit. So when I first started off, I was fresh out of college, and I thought I could do it, So I started teaching them, and you could just see their eyes glaze over, and they didn't care. So what I ended up doing was turning both into film music class. And then from there, like using like film scores, we were able to kind of bring kids in and teach them a little bit of theory and a little bit of history as well. So I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's cool when like you see them actually kind of like what you're talking about.
Yeah, when they connect to it. Yeah,
exactly.
With my younger year group as well, using comic books, I used to use quite frequently. So I'll take, if we're trying to look for, let's say we're trying to look for a metaphor or a simile, or even learn some new vocabulary as well, because some Marvel comics have great vocabulary. So I'll take a page out, I'll photocopy a page or screen grab a page and put it on the board. And then we'll say, okay, what techniques are the writers using? Oh, they use a metaphor. Oh, look at that powerful word they use. Oh, look, onomatopoeia. And we'd find all the techniques on the comic book page, which is just more exciting for them to look at than maybe, constantly looking at just novels and pages and pages of writing in English.
Right.
But still doing the same skills and looking at the same techniques. Because I was saying when I was a kid, I learned a lot of words in comic books that I'd never come across before. There's some really long words sometimes being used in Marvel comics that I'd never heard of before. And I'd look them up in the dictionary, and then I found a new word to add to my, my lexicon, my speaking vocabulary.
Very cool. But it does make me wonder, what would you say would be your happiest memory or moment of with Spider-Man?
Ooh, I think I've got a couple. I think really it's tricky to narrow it down. There's so many. Well, I think one of them I sort of alluded to earlier was that toy when I was little that my mom made for me. That Spider-Man action base. It was just a bit of cardboard with some things drawn on it and a few holes cut in it. But it was my Spider-Man base. It was where Spider-Man lived and is like a bit like Batman's Batcave, I suppose. I created in my head Spider-Man's base, but I played with that for like 2 or 3 years, and it was just absolutely loved it. My mom, just put it together in an afternoon probably to keep me occupied on a rainy day, and it was one of my favorite toys. They'd get me proper plastic toys. I'm like, well, I want to play with my Spider-Man box and put my Spider-Man figures in there. So that was a very happy memory as a kid.
It's awesome.
And my other one's a little bit later in life. Well, I played when I got my PlayStation 2, I think it was, and I got obsessed with the Spider-Man 2 PlayStation game, I think it was, and it was like you were Spider-Man.
Right.
And it was like the first one where you could web swing across the whole of New York had been programmed into the video game.
Right. Yeah.
I was going through a bit of a phase then of sort of loving, I was quite nerdy, quite shy. And I'd had a friend that I'd sort of just made, and he had this game, and we became fast friends. We sort of bonded over that game because I'd go around his house and play it. And then I bought it and he'd come around my house and play it. So there was this sort of connection forged between the two of us and we stayed friends for many, many years because of Spider-Man, the video game.
That's so cool. It's funny how, sometimes like the littlest things just like that can bring us all together.
I need to add as well as a bit of a naughty happy moment. I did once kiss a girl dressed as Spider-Man.
Oh, there you go. All right.
I went to a fancy dress party as Spider-Man, and
was it an upside down kiss?
Yes. So that's how I wrangled it. I sort of asked for a little kiss at the end of the night, and she said, "Well, you got to do it upside down like Spider-Man." So I climbed on a wall, hung upside down from my legs, and got a little kiss, which was quite nice.
Right on. I like it, man. I like it. But now we come to my favorite part of the show, which is a little bit I like to call Gag Me with a Spoon. So this is where we do our best impression of our least favorite part of, usually it's an episode or movie we watch. In this case, it's a comic. So I know it's hard to do comic. If you'd rather do something from the show or a movie as well, that's cool too. Just anything Spider-Man. I'm going to try to stick with the actual comic, and I'm going to do my best-ish Tom Holland impression. We'll see. But as a guest, why don't you go first?
Okay, so I stuck with the comic as well, and I just picked a line that I didn't like for the character more so, and the sort of stereotype of the sleazy lawyer at the start that kicks them out. Okay, and it's after Spider-Man attacks him. And again, it's just something that sums up, this litigation. I hate this whole thing. And again, it's a stereotype of, suing over everything. And it's just that, sleazy. Oh, I hate that character. What a horrible person. Yeah. And after Spider-Man or Peter Parker, I should say, grabs him and is, then calm down, the lawyer walks off and he says, and I'm going to do my sleazy voice, there could be a battery suit in this. That's what the lawyer says as he walks up. He's like, "Oh, what a horrible man! Like, what a disgusting character! He's trying to make you hate this lawyer." It's that stereotype of a sleazy lawyer.
Definitely 80s sleaze there. Yeah, for sure.
Exactly.
I actually went with the line that you quoted earlier, and it's classic Spider-Man. But the reason I didn't like it was, as much as I always like those times where Spider-Man is like, okay, I'm giving up, or the hero in general is just like, I'm done with it. I'm going to try to be normal. At the same time, there was a part of me as a kid that hated that. It's like, no, you're the hero. You always have to be the hero.
You're meant to be the hero. Yeah,
exactly. So that's really the only reason I picked this one bit. So it's when Peter's swinging, he's going to go, stop the little robbery. And he says, okay, let's see if I can do. I don't think I can do it at all, but I'm going to try. All right, let's see. I admit there are times I wish that radioactive spider had bitten someone else with bigger shoulders. Chuck Norris, Mike Tyson, Brigitte Nielsen. That's terrible.
That's good. That's very good. I felt like Tom Holland was in the room.
That's right. Tom Holland's here, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, man. But, I do have to ask, Adam, G.I. Joe taught us that knowing is half the battle. What do you think the other half is?
The other half of the battle is heroes sticking together, and that includes Santa Claus.
Yeah, I like that. It's better than mine. Mine is so if knowing's half the battle, the other half is not staying with the cousin of your wife when you know she's got a crush on you. So.
That's good advice for life, I think. There,
Oh man, Adam, it's been fun talking this issue and Spider-Man in general with you. But tell me about your show.
Yes, so I do a podcast called Merry Britsmas, and it's a Christmas podcast, but from a British perspective. So it talks about British Christmas music, TV, bit of film, and Christmas traditions as well. So if you are not British and you don't know much about British Christmas stuff, it might be interesting to find out things. But also if you are British, it's quite a hit of nostalgia. It makes you think about Christmases past. So you can find me on lots of podcast apps. I have an Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all just Merry Britsmas. So you can come along and chat to me there, or find me on your podcast app of choice and give me a listen.
Right on. Definitely check them out. There's so many cool things that I've learned just because I know nothing really about British Christmases. I'm from like South Texas. So to me, Christmases are warm. and which is kind of a pain. But there's been some cool music, some cool shows.
Thanks. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah,
definitely check them out. Yeah. And you just so by the time this drops, because we're recording this on Christmas podcast day, November 1st, but this will be dropping in a couple of weeks. So by now you've probably had another new episode.
Yeah, I'm going to have a couple of episodes in November and a couple of episodes in December. So I'll have 4 episodes out by Christmas Day. So keep an eye out for those ones in December. And usually I put a bonus one just before Christmas as well of Christmas music. So there'll be 2 in November and then 3 in December on the way.
Nice. And I always love your posts on the Discord about some of the various items that you've picked up or seen or things like that. And it's just like, I've never experienced anything like that. So it's really cool.
Weird British Christmas food and drink usually. We're our culinary tradition in Britain is not famed for its sophistication, I'll say. So there's always interesting stuff. I'll post about it on Twitter as well if you want to see weird Christmas food and drink and traditions.
I think the most I knew about it before some of your posts was fish and chips, of course, mushy peas, and like Sunday roasts, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I've had all of those in the last couple of weeks. Yeah,
nice. Those are like the main ones that I knew about. Yeah, but
it gets a lot weirder than that. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we eat tripe sometimes. So.
Oh no, I'm not a fan of that. Yeah,
it's not my favorite either. But if done correctly, it's okay. That's what I'll say. But thanks again for coming on. It's always a blast talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been brilliant.
And on that note, I'm going to end it by saying, enjoy peace on earth while you can, Spider-Man, because next issue, you'll be checking us out on our social media pages, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And if you're feeling like Peter finding his Christmas spirit, leave us a review on iTunes. Not only does it help us reach more people, but you also get a free sticker. Now, don't forget to check out our merch shop on tpublic.com and our brand new website, courtesy of Tis the Podcast Elf, Tom Crow. Later, dudes.
It's Christmas!
Hello, this is Adam from Merry Britsmas. I am a Christmas fanatic from the UK who thinks that the world needs to know more about the traditions, telly and music that helps make a British Christmas really festive. I look at everything from mince pies to Boxing Day to Wham to Slade to the Royal Family to Doctor Who. If you want to find out more about a British Christmas, or you are British and want a hit of nostalgia, check me out at Merry Britsmas.
An happy blooming Christmas to you and all.